Noah Geisel from Colorado. Noah is a Spanish professor at the University of Colorado in Denver, and he's also the director of the Batch Summit. And also, you might remember that he was the 2013 ACTFL National World Language Teacher of the Year. So it's a great privilege to have you here in a Q&A, a different format, and we are very glad to have some kind of a different presentation. It was actually suggested by Noah, and we are glad to have him here. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you so much, Israel. It is a huge honor and pleasure to be invited by yourself, IFLTA, and the Indiana Language Roadmap to join you all this afternoon. So many folks from all around the United States, it looks like, even all around the world. And of course, Indiana. My wife and I actually spent the night in a lovely campground outside of Indianapolis less than a week ago. So we were just in your state of Indiana, and I really appreciate the invitation. I'm sorry for interrupting you. What were you saying, Israel?
No, that's great. That's great. The kind of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun for us to just pass through and see a little bit of your fine state. And, you know, I'm really grateful to the openness and creativity of the IFLTA board and Israel, your leadership. You know, when they reached out and said, hey, would you be willing to share, you know, in this webinar series we're doing, I responded, you know, absolutely, I'm at your service. And, you know, I think that if you're open to it, we're in this extraordinary moment. And I don't think that that's brand new news to anyone, anywhere, least of all, any of the teachers who are on this call with us, that we are facing challenges that we've never faced before. And in a lot of our schools, you know, we're being asked to do things for which we've never been prepared, and that for which we may not, you know, feel prepared. And it's a scary thing, I think. It's an uncomfortable thing. And it's also something that I fear is not being acknowledged enough. That we're seeing a whole lot of what some of our colleagues call the highlight reel, you know, where everybody's getting to see the pretty Instagram filtered awesomeness of everything that went well, without us taking time and creating space to acknowledge that actually a whole lot of what's going on right now is completely failing on us. And it's really uncomfortable for us, and it's really sad for us, and it's real. It's our reality. And so what I proposed to Israel and the board was that we have this time not for me to throw up slides and tell you all these great things I'm doing, but rather for us to take a moment and create a safe space for teachers who are willing to give their time this evening to this webinar to really share what are your challenges. And then as a community, maybe we can discuss those challenges, because your challenge is probably not just yours. It's probably a challenge that's shared by a whole lot of other people in this community. And I do know that we have a whole lot of folks just looking at clicking through the gallery, folks who are not the first language English speakers. And so if I've not explained myself clearly, please do raise your hand in the webinar, type into the chat for asking us to explain it in different words. But the hope is that some teachers who are on this call with us would be willing to get vulnerable and either request to unmute yourself and share your challenge with us vocally, or in the group chat to type in a challenge that you are confronting in your own teaching and learning context. That, you know, I don't want to promise you that what we're going to respond with is, oh, do you know about this technology tool and this and all these amazing things you could do? I think what we're more looking to do is to be honest and vulnerable and say, yeah, that is a big challenge. Let's talk about that. And so if I've explained that well, maybe people could use their reaction button. If you've never used the reaction button on Zoom, to kind of give some thumbs ups. And if we have not explained it well, maybe some people could alternatively click into the chat box and say, huh? What is he saying? Because as we talked about before, we invited everybody in when it was Chain Maya, Israel, and myself. This is definitely different. This is a different approach to what we normally do. And so I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm seeing some yes, Tanya, to your question. This is about creating challenges. And so I'm seeing some people are dropping some challenges right away into the chat. That is fantastic. Is there anyone who, for the benefit of anyone who, just in case there's folks on this call who are unable to read in the chat, who would be willing to unmute themselves and share their challenge over the air, if you will? And I'm not sure which version of Zoom we're using. If you want to do that, if you have to raise your hand, and then Chinmay will unmute you.
So, Chalmay, we have one question. We have some hands.
Yeah, I saw some questions.
So we can unmute.
Let me see.
And while they're figuring out who to unmute, just thank you so much to the folks who are already kind of raising their hands, dropping your questions in the chat. We are seeing these. Thank you so much.
Let me see.
And just I hope that everybody else is also reading these, because you, I hope, will give yourselves permission, just because my name and picture is on the flyer does not mean that you don't have amazing thoughts, questions, reflections to share with your colleagues. So, if you are somebody who has dealt with, for example, declining enrollment in a language program. I just saw that one of our colleagues, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, but they are worried about potentially having a threat to the continuation of the Chinese language program because of low enrollment. And so if you're somebody who's dealt with that, even if it's not in Mandarin, perhaps a German program, you have strategies that you've used in order to help keep that program going, that would be, please do share. Have the audacity to believe in your own awesomeness and to seize control and go ahead and add to the conversation into the chat. I think it's totally okay if we have, multiple vibrant conversations going on at the same time.
We have a Josefina Davis, Noah. She would like to ask the first question. But Chalmay, I see also 3 questions on the chat while Josefina shares her first thought.
I try to find them, but it's hard to find them.
Josefina is already unmuted.
Okay, thank you very much.
You unmute yourself? Yeah.
As a teacher in our district, we've been told that we will be teaching both in the classroom as well as providing distance learning. And so for me, the question is if they're going to dictate which one we teach or if we're going to be expected to provide both. And I just want to come up with a system that's going to be one that doesn't overwhelm myself as a teacher, trying to do too much and burn out halfway through, or watering it down so much in order not to be overwhelmed that then the students don't have an engaging and rigorous, opportunity.
And Josefina, thank you so much for that question. Stay unmuted for us so that you can mute here, because just the few folks who have their camera on, there's people nodding like this, Josefina, right? Like you are not alone. This is scary, right? And so, what are you thinking right now already? It sounds like you're somebody who probably is pretty into having systems and organization. And so, what are some of your ideas that you're already tossing around?
Okay, thank you. Well, what I was thinking was in the classroom, make sure to welcome the students and start immediately guiding them to using the Google Classroom, as well as some other sites that I like Edpuzzle, and perhaps something else where I can create the activity where I put in the multiple choices and such, Google Forms, among others, and make sure that the students have something that's coming to them in the language. Then they're able to provide answers and self-grades, and make sure they know how to use the technology, so that then on the days that they're at home, or the ones that are at home alone, I'm teaching the technology, I'm teaching the language. We have the interactivity for those in the classroom. Perhaps record myself so that the distance learner can watch the video on YouTube, or the kid that dozed off or doesn't remember can review the input of the vocabulary or the grammar point or whatever, and then they can view it, and then they can do that activity. They're being held accountable to do the activity, and obviously start easy, because they're having to use the website or the online. Make sure that they're balanced and they know how to do that distance learning, even though they're coming into the classroom. And that way, if we go back to everybody at home, or if they become sick and no longer come into the classroom, they kind of know what is expected, and they're used to using technology in the classroom. And I'm just kind of playing around with it, how it might look in my mind. So if we're in the classroom, provide some in-classroom interaction, but then make sure that from day one, they have access to some technology, so that we start that expectation and the norm. And the experience in the classroom perhaps is a little bit friendlier, but the distance learning then is not as scary, and they know they will be needing to keep up with it so that they don't fall behind. That's my ideas right now.
What some of the, you are just in such a better place than I think a whole lot of other colleagues, not just as language teachers, but across disciplines. And you just sound, Josephina, like you have so many plans, and your students are so lucky for that. And I hope that that our colleagues who are listening heard you start off with just a couple quick things around greeting your students, that having clear expectations, that those are two things that we just know, right? When you read Marzano's book, Instruction That Works, those are two of the highest power instructional moves that we can do, is just having that relationship that they know the second they walk in the door, we care about them. And one of the things that we're realizing this spring is walking in the door might not be a physical door, that sometimes the door is a virtual door. And so if they're just coming in and it's about just taking attendance, that's one thing. But if it's coming in and about letting them know, hi, I know your name and I'm glad you're here and I care about you. And that right there, whether we're teaching world languages, math, PE, that's just such a high power instructional move to win them over. And the other thing that I really love about what you're saying is that, making sure that students know how to do just on a task level, as we incorporate more and more technology into our classes, especially those of us who are newer to it, there's a real onus on us to not just be language teachers, but to be technology teachers, that our students are going to come in, and if they don't know how to use, Josephina mentioned Edpuzzle, really amazing tool. And if we just say, go do this, some students are going to struggle. And at the end of the day, their grade is not going to be a reflection of their interpretive communication skills in the world language. Their grade might in fact be a reflection of their access to technology or their understanding of how to use technology. And so I really can't emphasize enough what you just said, Josephina, about making sure that students know how to use the technology. And I think that goes for us too. If we're going to assign our students something, we should probably take the time to actually play with it ourselves. And we don't need to be experts at it, but we probably want to be dangerous enough that if the problems arise, we have a good idea of how to troubleshoot it to help our students along.
No, I'm going to, thank you, Josefina. I'm going to unmute Fan, who also has a challenge. So Fan.
Thank you very much. Okay, my challenge will be, yes, I first of all, I acknowledge you for giving us this opportunity. This is great that we can talk and show and tell you how inside of us, how to think and what make us nervous, what overwhelms us. Thank you to the previous speaker. That gave me a very good idea. Now, my question is, how do I motivate my student in this way, perhaps in distance learning or face-to-face and half of distance learning? And how do I keep them going and maintain the interest of learning a language which is foreign to them, they do not speak at home? How do I do that?
That is such a great question. And, you know, I want to start out by just acknowledging you and your willingness to, you know, unmute yourself and be vulnerable and share with your colleagues like this, because, you know, as you pointed out, stuff's overwhelming. And, you know, I think it's important that before we get to just like pedagogy and, you know, student engagement, I think that your point about being overwhelmed is an important one, because this is not just a really tough year to teach in. This is an unprecedented time in which we are teaching. And it is not just disingenuous, but completely unfair and borderline inhumane for anyone in our profession to not be creating safe space to say, yeah, it's okay to be overwhelmed. You know what? If you in the middle of the day are having to turn off your camera and mute your computer because you're in tears, that's pretty normal, right? Like, we need to normalize that. That is not a problem. That is just our reality. And so I really appreciate you making it okay for all of our other colleagues to feel overwhelmed, because it's a pretty reasonable place to be right now. I think as far as engagement goes, and I'm hoping that, you know, we have, it looks like over 150 amazing colleagues that, you know, they're going to be dropping some amazing ideas into the chat here for engagement. But I think that one thing that's really important when we think about engagement, especially on the online piece, is that when our students are online, it is not the same as being in our classroom. And engaging them is not the same as being in our classroom. And so when we imagine our lesson design, and I would highly encourage everyone to think of themselves not just as a, you know, not solely as a teacher, but as a designer. You know, we are artists as language teachers, and we are designing amazing world-class world language education. And when we are designing that teaching and learning, it's one thing to do it face-to-face. When it moves online, it fundamentally has to change or it will not go as well. And so when we are thinking about moving online, if all we're doing is taking what we would have done and making it virtual, it should not surprise us when it doesn't go very well, because we didn't design something for online. We had something that we designed for face-to-face and moved it online. And so, you know, one of the kind of analogies that I would encourage you to think of is, you know, we're seeing right now, all these conferences all around us are either being canceled or moved online. And a lot of what we're seeing are online conferences that are actually just session content that is being broadcast out to you, and you are consuming it, but there is no conferring, right? A conference is about conferring and communicating and colliding and collaborating. And if that's not happening, it's not a conference, it is a broadcast. It's a YouTube video that just happened to be live. And so when we're thinking about how we do student engagement online, I really highly encourage you to think about how are we creating conditions in which, you know, people feel like people. people don't feel like they are an audience. People feel like they are participants. And I'm starting to see some ideas here, you know, in the chat. I love this idea of a see-through mask, you know, both for online, but as well as face-to-face. It's definitely a way of, you know, creating connection. You know, there's different people who are dropping comments about breakout rooms. I think that it can be really scary, and you know, anybody who's attended a baby shower over Zoom over the last couple months can probably know how boring it can be to just have 35 people in a room waiting your turn to speak. And so the breakout rooms can be a really effective way to create engagement for people, but also I think that playfulness is a really underutilized tool that a lot of educators are not necessarily thinking to do or not feeling comfortable enough or giving ourselves permission to do. If anyone has participated in or seen the Foreign Language Educators of New Jersey, FLENJ, was doing some online happy hours for language teachers. And you know, the one that I had the honor to co-facilitate with Samira Spielberg, you know, we had, you know, dozens and dozens of teachers in a room together, and yet it felt like we were at a party. It was very engaging and very fast paced, and I can take pretty close to zero credit for it. It was mostly Samira, and you know, it was games. It was clear expectations for this next part. We're going to put out these questions, or we're going to have a picture and you're going to respond to these prompts in the chat. Or for this next thing, we're going to put up this slide and you're going to have your own version of the slide that you're going to get to edit, and you have 2 minutes to do it. And so it's having things fast paced with time boxes that are very clearly communicated, instructions that are very clearly communicated, and, you know, getting creative. You know, one of the best things about world languages is that the students who love it, which is most of them, don't love it because they love memorizing grammar rules. They love it because they want to see what their awesome Chinese teacher is going to do next, right? It's like going to a TV game show every day when they come to our classes. And so when you're creating opportunities for them to still have that, you know, in this virtual environment, you know, all of a sudden you're going to have other colleagues coming to you to say, what are you doing? I have students who, you know, log into my class, but I know they're not there. They're just logging in for attendance, but then walking away from their computer and playing Fortnite, you know, but all your kids are showing up. What are you doing in your Chinese, Italian, Spanish classes to so well incorporate in student engagement? And that was a really long answer, but, and I don't know if we already unmuted the teacher or if she's still able to respond, or if we're going to go to the next question, Srad.
So we have one question from Elizabeth, and then we can go back to that teacher because we have too many participants. Let me see.
Yes, sir.
Elizabeth, you have a challenge as well. Just 1 second.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for her, if you're not reading the chat, please do read the chat. Your colleagues are dropping these amazing ideas into the chat as well that are both less verbose and way better than any of my ideas. So
I'm still muted.
No, we can hear you, Elizabeth. We can
oh,
hear
okay. I couldn't tell. I'll turn on my video. Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. Again, thanks to everybody for joining. I am a Japanese language teacher in Indiana. I'm also an ESL teacher because I don't have a full course load for Japanese. And this year, my course load has crashed, and I'm having to combine my first year in AP class as well as my second and third year AP class on the same year that we switched to a block schedule. This is my first experience with the block schedule, and while we're also dealing with COVID. So, so that's what I've got on my plate.
Yeah, that is a lot of realness you're dealing with. We have colleagues who talk about the highlight reel versus the highlight reel. I'll drop that in the chat so that everybody sees the language difference that we're talking about. But I think that you're in column B right now, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, and it's palpable. What about it does feel And as you think about the parts that go well, when nobody's looking, and maybe it's nothing like special with summative assessments or grades, maybe it's just like, the start of class getting to know you stuff, but
Yeah.
what's going well?
Because I'm the only Japanese teacher, I want to say I have a really good relationship with my upperclassmen, with my second, third, fourth year kids, because they've been willing to put up with me for 2, 3, 4 years, and so leveraging that is certainly the best thing I can do, whether it's through distance education or in the classroom. I have been trying to include more student input. And, as a teacher, we're control freaks, and it's really hard for us to say, well, what do you guys want to do? What do you guys want to learn? And so I've been trying to kind of push that, say like, no, it's okay to ask them. It's okay to consider their input. And then how do we incorporate what they want to learn and what they want to do into their learning? And so I've been doing that. And now I'm like, but now I have combined classes. So now what do I do?
Yeah. And do
So
you mind, Elizabeth, just expanding a little bit on that? Because I think that there's some people who are saying, wait, what did she just do? And I think that what you did requires, I don't want to sell you short. And what you did requires immense humility to say, yeah, I have a master's degree and you have a master's degree in yourself, kids. What do you want to do? And so can you tell us a little bit more about just what you did and how that experience was?
So the past 2 years, my first years and then now my second years have had some input into what we do. I'm like, you have to cover, your novice stuff first, and then we can move into the intermediate stuff. But I have a bunch of essential questions, and I say, okay, what sounds good? And like one of them was, what are stereotypes and how do we form stereotypes? And then I had them vote on, Japanese art and music, like you want to learn about Japanese art and music. And then there's the the classic ones like how do my, and this kind of goes in the stereotypes, but how do my hobbies and stuff determine kind of who I am? And there's identity stuff, but I give them simple things like that as a novice and say, okay, now we probably will cover all of these at some point, but what would you guys like to do first? And they vote, and we kind of set up an order that we're going to follow. And so then they have a little bit, I feel like, I don't, I've asked them and they seem to like it, but unfortunately it's not necessarily transferring into people staying in my classes, because usually there's other stuff going on. But I've been trying to just give them some choices, give them some options. And I'm trying to get my head around how am I going to do that with a blended class of second years and third years? Because I think everybody here knows there's a huge difference between your second years and your third years in any language. And so I'm trying to get my head around like, okay, how do we move forward? How do we go there? So.
Yeah, that's it's heavy stuff, and thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing that, because I think that what you did is pretty brave, and really it's scary, I think, for a lot of people. As you said, we're control freaks, right? I didn't spend my summer getting exercise and catching up on sleep. I spent my summer planning out all these lessons, and you're going to do them and I'm not going to change. And so for you to be willing to do that, I think that, for folks who are willing to go the route that Elizabeth went, you will be rewarded. When my college class this last semester, everything got moved to virtual, the very first class said, so, hey, things are messed up and weird moving forward. And, we have the syllabus and we can keep going with that. And it's also based off of a non-pandemic world. And so if you guys want, we can totally blow up that syllabus and focus on, looking at what the learning is supposed to be through the lens of what you want it to be. And, they voted blow it up, and we totally went in all these different directions. And some of it was good. A whole lot of it wasn't, but the fact is, I was getting 100% attendance most days. I was, even kids who I was sure were going to pan me on the end of semester reviews, instead were, who I just was positive these kids hated me, instead were, writing these reviews about how I was the best teacher they'd had at the university so far and stuff, where, and really, I was a terrible teacher to this semester, like most of us. Stuff didn't go well. And really, it was just saying, what do you need from me? Right? That before we got into class every day, it was just, hey, is there anything going on today that you need to let us know about before we get started? And letting them know, hey, it's okay if you need to tell us, don't call on you today. If you need to tell us, I need to have my camera off today, and I'm not going to tell you why, but I just need you to trust me. I'm not going to have my camera on today. And just creating this space for the students to express their needs, their issues, even if it's their expression of it is not, pulling the curtain back and actually telling us what their issues are, but just telling us, I'm going to need a little bit of space for this, or I'm going to need you to have some flexibility for me in order to meet my learning needs. Then we do that, because we've seen, my guess is close to 100% of us on this, meeting this afternoon had a whole lot of students who just didn't show up to class, that virtually they just didn't show up. And it probably didn't have so much to do with the teaching and learning in our class. It probably had a whole lot to do with what's going on in their world and whether or not they felt like it was okay for them to bring that piece of what's going on in the world into the world of our class. And so I really appreciate you being willing to share that with folks, Elizabeth.
Noah, we have a concern, and sorry if I'm pronouncing it not well, Jintian. Jin, let me see. You are muted about the kinetic activities.
Hello.
Hi, yeah, that's me. Yeah, sorry, I have a little background noise and didn't hear what you said.
You had a question about the kinetic activities?
Yes, I did. Because I teach at a middle school, and the challenge I have has been like, it's challenging like for kids to stay in front of computers. I believe it's pretty common, and I haven't figured out enough like activities for kids to move around while they're like, what kind of challenge we can give them or something.
We had a problem with the sound.
I think where she was going was with students at the middle school age, how are we creating opportunities for them to still experience movement? And for any of the teachers who've not taught middle school, congratulations on still having dignity left, because those of us who've taught middle school no longer have that, because they take it from you pretty fast. And one of the things that we do know is that they are not very, their learning goes a whole lot better when they have the ability to move around than when they don't. And so how are we creating opportunities, I think, is the question that was asked, for students to have movement while teaching and learning is occurring in these virtual environments. And I think that there's probably a whole lot of stuff that we've seen with the scavenger hunts, that a lot of us are probably familiar with. And I see Susan, so I'm going to skip that one. And if you have questions, ask Susan in the chat to give you some some more in-depth response. I also think that there's opportunities with authentic resources to find content that is in the target language that you can give your students as challenges. And maybe even there's opportunity, as our last question brought up, as Elizabeth brought up, of turning a little bit of control over to the students. What if it's not you taking on, as a Japanese teacher, how do I find all of these movement videos on YouTube? Maybe it's inviting students to, find, hey, here's a challenge, find a, 1 to 5 minute video that involves movement that's in Japanese, and you're going to be the teacher for the day, and you're going to be the one who introduces this video to your classmates. And for some of them, maybe the movement is learning a new dance. For some of them, maybe the movement is, a workout video. And for some of them, maybe the movement is, ways of stretching, or ways of maybe the movement is drawing. It's a drawing lesson in the target language. But again, are the students going to totally understand a Japanese workout video that's made for native speakers of Japanese and they're, you know, at the novice mid-level? Absolutely not. But are they going to be able to intuit what's going on? Yeah. When the person's, you know, saying now do jumping jacks and then they're doing jumping jacks, they're going to figure out what to do. And so they're going to get that movement. And you as the teacher have still kept it in the target language, even if it's not necessarily, you know, at 100% comprehensibility. You have created the conditions for them to be doing stuff in the target language, and also perhaps creating conditions for them to have this moment of, you know, success in understanding what's going on in the target language. They didn't understand every word, but they understood I was supposed to be doing jumping jacks and I don't even speak Japanese. How cool is that? You know what, I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to make it from Japanese 2 to 3 to AP. And, you know, I'm going to study abroad in Japan because I see myself now as being a bilingual and biliterate person when I grow up.
No, I think, let's see if Wendy might ask about the see-through masks. I see this concern or challenge. Wendy, would you like to share your concern with the see-through masks? You are unmuted.
Am I muted?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
You-
Hi,
You
Wendy.
can. Hi. Yeah, so what I've been thinking about a lot is teaching with a mask on. We'll be face-to-face at university. We'll be face-to-face. I'll have small class. I'm also worrying about what if half of the students decide to take instruction from home, and then having to do the high flex instruction with communicative activities, but only having 3 students in the class. Just really struggling with how to do, you know, both in class action and have something going on for the students who are at home at the same time. I'm having a hard time envisioning that.
We have some kind of.
All the students are in class. I think we've requested face shields, but I don't, you know, I haven't tried them out yet to see how it will be to speak behind a face shield. Students understanding each other as they're, you know, in a form, as you all know now, very muffled, and it's hard to understand each other even in England in your native language. So.
Yeah, so I think, and Wendy, I apologize, we're getting some latency on your internet connection there. So it was pretty choppy, but I think that you were asking, maybe you could correct us in the chat just about for our interpersonal communication tests, you know, when we're having challenges, not just with some students being present, some students being present face-to-face, other students being present virtually. How do we still have interactive communication tests or interpersonal communication tests happening? How do we have, you know, engaging our students when they need to be engaged with each other, as well as I think I heard her getting at, you know, just it's hard to be heard through a mask and understood. And it's also, you know, we're seeing this in our, you know, as Wendy pointed out, in just our day-to-day lives. If you live in an English language speaking community, you know, or maybe even your own household, if you can't see somebody's mouth and make out the words, a whole lot of communication is getting lost, right? I'm seeing, you know, people getting in fights, you know, behind the counter at your takeout place because they're not communicating well. And so the mask is definitely a constraint that we have to overcome. I think that, you know, one thing that I would highly encourage people to look at is the way that our elementary teaching colleagues have been teaching forever has a whole lot to offer us with stations. And so, and if you've never, I mean, there's so many amazing resources out there for stations, but the Creative Language Classroom blog is definitely a great place. I know they've been blogging about stations for probably 300 years. They have some amazing resources out there to get you started with stations. But, you know, if you go watch in a pre-pandemic world, an amazing, kindergarten or first grade classroom, one of the things that is really common is that the teacher doesn't spend their whole day doing full class instruction. There are stations, and students know what the expectation is in each of those stations. And one of the stations is small group direct instruction with the teacher. And so, that might be a place, Wendy, to consider going, when we're thinking about how do we create these conditions where we can successfully have interpersonal communication happening. Maybe some of it is, if it does require the teacher, that some of that's happening as part of a station rotation, or maybe it's a blended model, maybe it's something that is just small group scheduling, but instead of you trying to run that with 35 people or 300 people, it's you running that with a smaller group of students who are, similarly, who are grouped based off similar background knowledge and levels of readiness.
Right. No, we have a question from Luis Bastidas from North Carolina. Let's see. You are unmuted.
Hello. Yes, I mean, I posted the question. It was regarding the proficiency that students have in the skills that they are supposed to have to face an online instructions in such a short time, like the way we did. We've had pretty much like 1 month to prepare for this challenge, to put all the information, as you said, online, whether it was tutor instructions, based on the content that we were supposed to do in class, through a video and through all the materials that we give the students in the classroom. I am an ESL teacher here in North Carolina, and we use a platform in the schools that is attached to the grades and everything that the school uses, so we have to post this information. We were supposed to motivate somehow the students, keep in touch with them, because besides putting this information, we have to be in touch with the families, calling them on a regular basis and asking them to connect to the classes. And when they were supposed to respond to that input, I mean, the students were not even able to upload a document or to respond to one question. So that is something that puts the situation in somehow a reality check, because we were thinking that these students in this generation were people who were used to technology and were using technology in a very easy way. But when it comes to an educational situation, there are some things that they don't know. So we have to face that situation too. I mean, we have to teach them how to use these applications and how to use these platforms in order for them to be successful and for them to acquire as much as they can in the time that we have. I know that it was somehow tragic, and it was terrible, the little time that we have to adapt and that they had to adapt to this new system of instruction. But we need to face the reality now, that we have the time and plan somehow what are the skills that the students need to have in order to face the challenge the upcoming year, because it seems that not a school system I'm going to go back to the classroom right away. So I don't know if they're going to be using a blended system where they have to be live and in the classroom for a time and online somehow, for the rest of the instruction, or they have to keep going with the online instruction that we have been doing so far. So I wonder, what are the skills that our students need for them to face this reality and for them to be prepared and for us to be prepared too?
And that was such a brilliant question. I'd seen it in the chat as well. Luis, thank you so much for posing that. And, hopefully some other folks are going to respond to this as well. But I think Luis's point is really important that, as we touched on earlier, our students are being asked to learn in a ways for which they've not been prepared, right? Like we definitely can feel sorry for ourselves as educators that, well, I'm being asked to be an online teacher. There's people with like advanced degrees on designing online learning, and all of a sudden I'm expected to just like know how to be an online teacher. Not fair. And I think it's, something that's not being acknowledged enough is that our students, for the most part, have not learned how to learn online. And all of a sudden, as Luis points out, they're being forced to be online learners without being prepared to be online learners. And if the schools aren't going to, and the districts aren't going to take that on, then it kind of falls on us. And so Luis, I definitely have my ideas, but as somebody who, it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into it, what are some of the skills that you are already saying are really important for your students to have if they're going to succeed as online learners in your class and all their other classes?
Perfect.
Well, the level of response that I had with the students was one of the most concerning parts that I had, because I was posting information expecting them to respond. But I don't know that the personal situations that they have, whether they have an internet connection. That's one of the limitations that we had. Not everybody had access to internet. Or if they had a computer, or if they had a cell phone at least. That was one of the variables that we were taking into account. But once we identified that the students had all of these, we start observing them individually, and we found out that they didn't have the skills. And that was one of the limitations and preventing them to participate. So because we had the chances, they had the chances, for instance, for example, for ESL learners, if they cannot write, they had the chance to record a video or to record their voices through the system, which was explaining the video that we included in the instructions. So they had the instructions, they had the instruments, they had the plans for all the materials that they needed to have, and the response was not there. So somehow, as you said, we probably would have to do instructions ourselves. That's going to be part of our responsibilities, not only to teach them the content, but to also teach them how to use the technology that is available for them to be successful. So we have to include in our agenda and in one of our hats the instructional part of that kind of learning. So how to download materials, how to upload, which is pretty basic, how to record a video, how to record their voices, and how to respond to the input that is being posed there, because the information and all the materials were pretty interesting. I mean, it was something that they were looking, or they were learning in the other classes too, from a different perspective, the way we use in the ESL classes.
I love those responses. And I would add to that, Luis, I think that a skill that maybe we don't think of as being technological, but I think is recognizing when you need help and knowing how to get that help. And I think that helping our students on this technology piece, equip themselves with how to get that help on their own, right? I mean, how many of us have all of a sudden, figured out, oh, I don't need to put in a ticket to the district instructional technology office. I can go on YouTube, I can look this up and find a tutorial on how to solve this myself. And so I think that, helping students help themselves is a really important skill. And when they aren't able to help themselves, helping them have the skill set and the advocacy set to know when to reach out to help, how to reach out to help, and to actually go forward with reaching out for help. And another thing that I do want to point out, and there's a really lively discussion happening in the chat about this, is around expectations. And you mentioned, Luis, really explicit directions. And I think that that's really important. And, I think about there's an old Monty Python skit. I know we had somebody from England say something earlier. There was an old Monty Python skit where they, just give people a soccer ball on a soccer field and say, start playing. And all these people, that they don't know, they're just doing stuff, and they're playing soccer wrong. It's a really funny video, but it also is great for helping us realize that, sometimes we think we've set people up to succeed and all we need to do is say go. But a lot of times, we haven't actually given them the directions necessarily in a way that are heard. And I think anybody who's married is probably able to really kind of nod along to this, that you've said something and, a week later there's, vitriol over it, and you find out that, oh, what you said was not heard as what you said, it was something else. And so sometimes maybe something we can do to help our students with directions is think about what are different ways that, how can I give this direction? And then how can I give this direction in an entirely different way so that it will be heard for what it is and not confused for something that it isn't?
Yes, thank you, Noah.
Thank you, Luis. I think, I don't know, Diane, would you like to be unmuted? Diane Wilson, a French teacher from Indiana, for your challenge. Should I unmute? Okay.
What challenge is that?
About the classes with children.
With the students, we were talking about masks for distance learning, and I've been practicing. I wear my mask and deliberately practice projecting. But what I worry about is I have a lot of student-led teaching, or I have in the past, student-led teaching. And what are we going to do with the students trying to navigate through that mask thing? Or even with the interpersonal communication, if we're have to wear masks in class, there are exercises for interpersonal, but how are we going to do that with the masks, without the mask getting in the way? So I kind of, I've been wondering about that. I haven't really, you know, hit on any solution, but you know, where we are trying to provide avenues for interpersonal, should we just give up and have it be between them and their machine? I've seen some teachers advocating, you know, that you're basically going to be isolated. Everybody's going to be isolated and working on their own. So if we're talking interpersonal communication, then that means find like a program that will, like a Linked or a Shalala, that will allow students to back and forth with the computer. But that doesn't sound like any fun. Maybe we could get things with other classes. That might work. Okay, so it helps to talk about these things. If I have some teacher friends who are on like All French 1, and we could come up with a lesson and then they could talk to those kids. But those are the types of things I've been wondering about, you know, just, you know, seeing the absolutely no touch rule is kind of worrisome if we're going to go back into the classroom.
Yeah, especially for student discipline. No, I'm just joking. I think that, you know, you make a really good point, Diane, and I'd love to to tie it back to Luis's point. And that, you know, I think that us seeing, you know, this challenge and thinking, well, should we just give up? You know, I'm with you. You know, I hear you, Diane, saying I don't want to give up, and I'm with you. I don't think we should give up. And I think that, you know, to Luis's point, you know, we're not just preparing students to succeed in learning in August and September of 2020. We're preparing students to be successful for the rest of their lives. And so I think that, you know, we shouldn't underestimate, you know, the power of, you know, maybe pivoting a little bit to, are we giving, like, where do we sacrifice, but where do we persevere? And so, you know, Diane, I think that in some cases, teachers may look at the situation, and for that interpersonal communication activity or presentational communication activity, you know, maybe there's some sacrifices that get made. But at the end of the day, you know, one of the things when you look at our education system and, you know, our outcomes for everything that people, you know, say about how American education is failing, the fact is that, you know, there's a whole lot of other countries that aren't in the G7. There's a whole lot of other countries that aren't leading the world and inventing and innovating and, you know, producing the things that, you know, make us so successful as a nation and a society. And it's not from giant worksheet packets. And it's not from, you know, just interacting with a computer on right and wrong answers, you know, that are machine graded. You know, when we think about 2030, 2040, 2050, you know, for our students to be successful, it's got to be on stuff that, you know, skills that are going beyond, you know, knowledge level concerns. Because, you know, IBM's Watson, you know, was winning at chess against human beings a decade ago. you know, and in the meantime, it's been learning 24/7, 365, you know, learning millions of terabytes of data every hour. You know, like our students are not going to be able to compete with Watson on, you know, knowing the right answer to something that already has a right answer. And so I think that, you know, it's pretty important that people, I think, you know, get on the Diane Wilson ethos of that's not fun and it's not okay to have students not interacting. And maybe the way they interact doesn't look the way it would if we weren't in a pandemic, you know, and maybe the way they're interacting isn't totally focused on, you know, language learning objective for interpersonal communication skills 2.3, but it's really important that they are interacting and doing so in ways that are going to help prepare them for those successful futures. Because, you know, if we're just doing stuff that prepares them, you know, to be in a future that's easily automated or outsourced, I don't think we're doing them any favors.
No. Yeah. Some Chinese teacher just type on the chat board, and I think some teacher from Illinois, just like Lin Lao Shi just mentioned, she is worried about the enrollment for next fall, because there's not too many new Chinese students for enrolling Chinese 1, I think. And some school maybe they may close some foreign language program. I know in Indiana, there's one school they are going to close their Chinese program, and one school is going to phase out the German program. So could you give us some suggestions how to keep the foreign language program?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And, you know, we have, I'm just amazed how many folks are joining us this evening. And so I hope that if you have had a situation of being a part of, you know, programs that have faced challenges with declining enrollment, that you will share any strategies that you've found to be successful. You know, I've, as a Spanish teacher, you know, I've not had that issue. And what I have had is being in a school district that eliminated world languages as a requirement for high school graduation. So before, students had to have 2 years of a world language in order to graduate. The district decided to make it 0. And at the high school where I was teaching at the time, you know, 3 years later, we had 3 new Spanish teachers compared to before, even though all of a sudden students could graduate with taking 0 language classes. And, you know, I would attribute that 100% to students enjoying language classes. And in that particular school, there was a real focus on comprehensible input and making, you know, the language learning meaningful. I'm not saying that's what it's going to be for every learning community, but I will share that's what it was for that one. And that we worked really hard on, you know, the craft and the art of teaching, and not just focusing on, you know, learning outcomes, but really focusing on learning experiences. That students who love Chinese class are going to tell other students, I love Chinese class. Why would you take Spanish? Why would you take French? You got to get into Chinese class. Why are you taking art? Why are you taking creative writing and photography when you could be taking Chinese with this amazing teacher at our high school? And so, you know, that's not an amazing answer, and it's definitely not a fast one. It takes time. But the best, you know, promotional assets we have for our language learning programs are successful language learners who are, you know, the first person narrative of, this is amazing, you guys got to do this as well. You know, I know that there's been some really cool work out of Oklahoma with German programs, and, you know, that were just on the verge of extinction, and that were, you know, brought back stronger than ever and expanded, you know, from, you know, 1 class to now having multiple teachers to meet demand. And so, you know, reaching out to the IFLTA to learn about what's happened in Oklahoma might be a resource. And hopefully again, there's other people on the chat who have way better kind of feedback than I do for that.
No, we have one more question, but let me confirm if Tracy, if you would like to be unmuted, just give me 1 second. So, Tracy, you are unmuted in this moment. You have a question, a concern?
Oh, sorry. I just typed in the meeting chat. I said one big question I have is how do we build relationship with the new coming students if we still go virtual online, still go virtual in the fall?
That is such a good question. What ideas do you already have for that, or what have you already been thinking of trying?
I'm not sure yet because I don't know what it's going to be like in the fall. It's our district is more likely to be blended model. And I don't know how that's going to work, half day in the building, half day remote. And when you don't see your students, it's really hard to build relationship with them.
That is such a good point. I know what is your normal approach to getting to know who your students are and building those
Yeah, if we in the classroom and from the week one, we will do all kinds of ice-breaking activities, get to know each other, and we form a circle, we sit down in a circle, we play games. And for the last few months when we did online, I already taught them many years, they still don't really want to participate. If I do a show me how, or like my favorite something, or show and tell, they wouldn't turn on their camera, they wouldn't do that. So now I said, oh, wow, I already have a relationship with them. I still have a hard time. And what about the new students when they don't know me at all? So that's a big thing I'm thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I'm guessing we're about to have a flood of comments in the chat about this. And just if people are not paying attention to the chat, I highly recommend you look at Susan's comment going back to the program question about enrollment. She had a really good one about reaching out to your feeder schools. So if you're at a middle school, the elementary school, if you're at the high school, the middle schools, to really engage, students before they're even, know to make a choice, get over those schools and talk up your program. I love that idea. Thanks, Susan, for sharing it. And to your question, I think that, that we're going to get a lot of great responses in the chat, but, some things that my mind goes to is that, a lot of teachers, even, in pre-COVID, will do surveys at the beginning of the year of asking their students questions. And so, finding out when their birthdays are, finding out what their favorites are, whether it's colors, foods, their favorite animal, and also like get weird, get out there. What superstitions do you have? What is your catchphrase that nobody else knows except for you and your friends, but you think it could be famous one day? What are your superpowers? This is a big one that I've been using for group work. Is asking students, what are your superpowers, and getting them to think of, just everyday superpowers. Like, are you really good at staying up late at night? Because that might be good for your group. Are you really good at organization? Are you really good at clarifying something that's confusing for other people who were confused? And when students start sharing their superpowers with one another, it's good for you because you now know this and you can highlight it when you're introducing a task. You can say, and if anybody struggles with this, definitely talk to Diane because we know she's really good at empathy. Or, as you're picking your groups, if you know you're procrastinators, you might want to have Sarah with you because she's really good at pulling all-nighters and you're going to need her on that last day. And so, just a superpower question is another good one. But getting back to the point of a survey is, you get this ways of just learning who people are beyond, what the student information system tells us about them, and then using that information, not just like collecting it, but using it. So, teachers who use storytelling will oftentimes pull that information from the surveys in order to build out characters that are based on the students. But also, as you're pulling in authentic resources, if you're getting to know your students, what types of resources that you might be able to pull in, and you can actually name like, oh, Luis is really into bachata, so I'm going to talk about this bachata singer, you know, when we're talking about this, you know, issue in the Dominican Republic or something. And so, you know, I think that personalizing it, I guess, is a shorthand way of what I'm saying, that when we learn more about our students, it almost is a shortcut for us to take our teaching and learning and make it about them in kind of secret, hidden ways that they didn't realize we were doing. And then another thing that I would say that I think, you know, I'm personally finding success with, and that I just anecdotally I'm seeing over and over is working for people, is scheduling time with students that's not class time. It's just check-in time. I think it's totally okay to send students a calendar invite for 4 minutes. You know, it doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It can be fast, and it doesn't have to be one-on-one. It can be in pairs or threes or fours, just to let them know that you care. You know what I mean? And also, and I think that just one final point that I'll make is, you know, when you talk about students not wanting to have their camera on, you know, students are not in a classroom when they're remote learning, right? And where they may be someplace that is not comfortable for them to share. And I think it's something that's really, really important for us to be sensitive to as educators, that, you know, part of our, so, you know, if you can think back to, you know, when cell phones were first coming out, and all of a sudden every student had cell phones. We had a lot of students who would have a busted flip phone in their pocket from the thrift store, and, you know, they'd pretend like it worked because it was embarrassing to not have a cell phone, right? Like, think of some students right now who are in those situations where, you know, them having their camera on might not, they're having their camera off might not be about them not wanting to engage. It might be more about them not being comfortable sharing the environment that they're living in, because the environment that they're living in is not an environment that they're okay learning in. And it's really, you know, important that we're sensitive to that. Otherwise, you're going to have major issues with student engagement with those kids. They're going to feel, you know, safer to just ditch class and fail than to turn on their camera.
Noah, would you accept one last question? I see
Absolutely.
a hand up, and I'm worried about Dune. I'm going to unmute you. I see your hand on the screen.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much for giving me the chance. Yeah, I have a couple of questions related to balancing empathy of the students' learning environment or given condition that they are in when go virtual learning, and accountability. So suppose you understand that their situation, the situation they're in, make it difficult for them to complete the tasks and keep up with the pace of the learning. But then I guess we as educators still need to hold a certain standard for the accountability. How do we as educators balance that, you know, empathy and accountability piece? And there is another question was for differentiation. I always had mixed levels, like suppose I teach Chinese, so Chinese 2 and 3 in one classroom. For virtual learning, do you have any suggestions in terms of differentiated teaching and learning? Thank you.
And these are really powerful questions, you know, and I think that, you know, one thing that might be helpful for us on that accountability question is not just, you know, how do we pursue accountability, but also what does accountability look like? Because it may be that as educators, our best service to our learners is not assuming that the way accountability has looked for us in the past is the way it needs to look like moving forward. And, you know, and maybe that is true, but we're only good, but we need to not assume that it's true. I think it's important that we question it and that we validate it. And so, you know, one thing that I think is really on the accountability front, I would invite everyone to, if you're not already leaning on the actful and necessful can-do statements. I would highly encourage you to look at the can-do statements, to share those with your students, and to, you know, really use those as a starting place on the accountability. And, you know, where you go from there is going to be, you know, very, you know, individual to your teaching style, to the needs and demands of your learning community and of your learners. You know, one thing that I would definitely encourage people to check out is, you know, the if you were a fan back in the day of LinguaFolio, my understanding is that LinguaFolio is kind of being brought back by the Language Center out in Oregon. I can't remember if it's University of Oregon or Oregon State. Somebody will remind me. I think it's Oregon. Coral, I think, is their language resource center. But they have made LinguaFolio available, if not for free, then for very cheap, like $2 or $3 per student per year. And it's essentially creates a portfolio, kind of an online portfolio system that allows us to align can-do statements with artifacts that students provide us of evidence of how they met any given can-do statement. And so, you know, it is I'm not saying that that's the answer. I do think it's one of the potential right answers that's out there as we, you know, think about what does accountability look like. Maybe it's not about, you know, this grammar rule or, you know, this vocabulary quiz. Maybe it's about what can students do with the language at the proficiency level, you know, that we are trying to help, to which we're trying to help them aspire. And how do we know they can do it? How do they know they can do it? And, you know, I think that, you know, it could be a system for some people who are willing to try it that is a place of more friendly accountability and more meaningful accountability to teaching and learning. I think it definitely scaffolds well for folks who are in states or districts that are, you know, involved in sealed by literacy. You know, that if you are using something like LinguaFolio, where you are helping students, and you could also just do it, you could recreate Google LinguaFolio with a Google slide deck, frankly, or, you know, any number of ways of recreating something like this, but a portfolio system that helps students progress monitor and goal set for their language proficiency across, you know, interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal communication modes. And I would highly encourage you to also include the intercultural competency standards as well.
Wow, no, yeah, thank you very much. I think that I join the words from many of the participants with your powerful words, outstanding coaching, and the way you let us feel, you know, confident in knowing that, yeah, the unknown, many things that are unknown, we're going to face that, but we need to look for alternatives to face those challenges. And we really appreciate it. Thank you for taking more of your time, 18 minutes after the time of your conversation. Once again, it's very, very powerful. And I think our teachers in Indiana and in USA and overseas could learn a lot from your expertise. So Noah, if you could stay just for 2 minutes, and we are going to finish this webinar. There is one question about how to contact Noah. Noah has a Twitter handle. Actually, I can see that I didn't include that on the flyer, but it's Noah. Could you remind us the Twitter handle, please? Oh, over there.
Yes, of
So
course. It's at Senor G, SENORG. I'm at Senor Geisel on Instagram, although I'm not very active on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. I'm also not great on Facebook, but you're welcome to reach out to me. Just sorry in advance if it takes me a long time to get back to you. My email is there, puravidanoah@gmail.com. I just, again, thank you so much to Israel for your leadership, to the IFLTA board for being willing to, you know, try something totally different than just me throwing up a bunch of slides and talking at people for an hour. I hope that this has been a productive and useful experience for all the attendees, and also to the Indiana Language Roadmap for hosting this conversation. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to all of you.
no, we really appreciate this. No, this has been a learning experience as teachers, and the format that you propose, I need to highlight that this was the format that Anoa proposed, because we have plenty of webinars, but this is a way also to, you know, to give the chance to teachers to speak up and let us know about situations that maybe we don't cover, or we don't mention, we don't say in the webinar. So we really need to thank you for your proposal and the possibility of letting